Namaskar and welcome to our first episode of Neuroimpact. Today we speak to renowned cellist musician Saskia Rao de Haas on her perspective on music, silence, and educating the mind. Namaskar, Saskia ji, much for agreeing to be a guest on this podcast. As I've mentioned, this is to understand the impact of neurology on other facets of life. So you're a very accomplished musician. You are based in Delhi today, but you grew up in the Netherlands. So let me start by asking you to tell me a little bit about how you grew up in Netherlands, your journey into music, and maybe transition into how India happened.
I grew up in the Netherlands, in the beautiful countryside with a few windmills, cows thrown in, and a beautiful place. And everyone in my family played music, everyone. So quite a few professionally, others were scientists. So varied professions, but music was a very, very common thing. My grandfather used to play the cello, and I was very close to him, so also chose to play the cello itself. From early it was clear that was something I really wanted to do the rest of my life, and I played a lot as a child, went to the conservatory, was actually focused on becoming a concert Western cellist. But things went differently. I heard some Indian classical music at my conservatory at a class on world music, and was fascinated by it. Got to know that in Rotterdam there is this whole conservatory there where also Indian music is taught. Artistic director none other than Pandit Hariprasad Chaurasia. So I went there to get to understand the music a bit more. But, well, in short, that went wrong. So I really got drawn in deeper and deeper into the music, and so much so that I really literally switched from Indian music, from Western classical to Indian classical, North Indian classical I should say. My first teacher in India was Dr. Sumati Mutadkar, who was one of the very, very few female Drupad singers, and also was the dean at the Delhi University for a long time. Very erudite, very knowledgeable, and known as a staunch traditionalist within the music. And she, in a way, showed me the key how open a tradition can be of traditionalists, because we often think in traditionalism we don't look forward or look at the
Beyond
future. But she was very different. She was 76 at that time, and she said, I wish I was also 5 years younger so I could also learn this instrument, the cello. So she, my guru Hariprasad Chaurasia, helped me carve a niche, a space for the cello in Indian classical music. When I came back to the Netherlands, I continued my studies instead of Western classical, became more Indian classical.
And how much time had you spent in India before going back?
A year.
A year?
Yes.
So it was some sort of a fellowship?
It was a really, really nice fellowship, scholarship
based
to study.
In Delhi?
Yes.
That was in
Delhi.
Delhi. Okay.
Yeah. So then I came back, did my master's in performing at the conservatory with a specialty in Indian classical music. My guru at that, Pandit Hariprasad Chaurasia, said, my guru told me, that was Annapurna Devi, I should learn from different artists to create a style
of your own.
Of my own. So he said, you should do the same thing. Learn from vocalists, from violin, from sitar, but create a style that is really suitable to your instrument. So I really followed that. stylistically, I follow really closely the Maihar Gharana. Pandit Hari Prasad Chaurasia is of course a part of that, as is Ravi Shankar. And then I met Shubhendra, my husband, and we got together and shared our life and our music every day. We live our music, and I moved permanently to Delhi at that time. So yeah, in a nutshell, that is where my music is. Then I was fortunate to be performing at all the major Indian classical music festivals, introducing the cello to this repertoire in a way.
It's the first time this has been done, if I'm correct?
No, it's not the first time that the cello is introduced, but the instrument I created is completely new. It's a 5-string resonating strings. Yeah, the cello itself in Indian music, actually it could have been introduced much earlier. Okay. Rabindranath Tagore wrote to his grandson in London in 1937. Right. I'm not so enthusiastic about you learning the violin. Why don't you learn the cello? Okay. I believe this instrument is more suitable to our music. Yes, this I found when we were doing a project in Calcutta around Rabindranath Tagore. Okay. Yeah.
And what about the cello was it? I know you sort of grew in an environment, your grandfather played the cello, but you modified the instrument, but was it already close enough as an instrument to something which is...
Yes, it is. The cello is probably the closest to the human voice that you can get, okay, in sound, color. So that makes it very suitable to Indian classical music. When people introduce it, they usually only choose for the Drupad style. I chose to follow the Maihar Gharana, which still has that complete Drupad alap, but then compositions in varietals. So so that is new. The need, I felt the need, but it's not necessary to do it. The instrument, the cello, is beautiful as it is. So it's a choice of stylistically what you want to do, how you want to perform your music. So for me, I really like the process of creating that instrument as well.
Right. And I guess it sort of brings into fold that your role in music is not just as a composer, as a performer. You sort of created an instrument in its own right. And as a neurologist, if I sort of start thinking about this process, there's a lot of creativity. And there's a lot of creativity which is not limited to any one aspect of cognition. As a neurologist, my understanding of music or my study of music would question themes like harmony, melody, and rhythm. Mm-hmm. How do you think these things have an effect on our perception of music? In your understanding, how does it affect our brain?
I think it is sprinkled in with everyday usage of our language in every possible way. Right. And that is probably an indication how fundamental it is on who we are as living entities. To be in tune, to be in harmony, in sync. All of these things have this positive connotation of being at peace. And perhaps that is one of the most important roles of music and how it calms the mind. But that's just one very small aspect. I think it's much, much, much more fundamental than that. I think we can go back to the origin of who we are for sure, but perhaps also of the entire universe. If we look at the scriptures of any religion or even science, at the origin of everything there is this sound. what do you call it, Om, a big bang. First there was the word. It all boils down to sound. Sound, of course, is a vibration, but we respond to it so direct. There's a lot of research, both really amazing and some pseudo as well, of course. Of the power of sound and music. But yeah, to me, that is always amazing. And I think the research to the perceived knowledge, the knowledge that the saints and the great thinkers received, they always put sound and music at the center of their experience. Sound or silence, both.
Your favorite topic?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
We'll touch upon that in a second, but do you think music is a language?
It's not a language. It's the
language.
Yes, exactly.
Because it's universal.
Yes.
And I think the perception of it starts at the very at
Absolutely.
when we are born. You're perceiving,
Absolutely.
kids are perceiving sound at that
Before they're born.
before they understand a word.
But before they're born.
Oh yes, of course. We have the Mahabharata where Abhimanyu learned how to break the Chakravyuh when Krishna was telling Subhadra.
Yes, that's the myths, but also I know stories from other musicians that had children who knew certain pieces of music.
Well, in your own case, I think Ishan's a budding pianist, and you've told me that his understanding of music at the age of 2.
Oh my God, was really, really advanced and tested by none other than Bharatratna Ravi Shankar when he was not even 2 years old. And he would know over 20 different ragas, could sing. Music, was literally how he was shaped, I think.
Do you think there was something to do with the physical proximity of the instrument to him growing inside your womb?
I definitely believe that too, because the cello literally rested on my belly.
Right.
And with the low sounds that pervades the entire body and your being. Definitely.
Amazing. And I think you've said this before, that he, unapologetically himself? He feels that today he's in Boston and he is able to be in an environment where he's unapologetically himself.
Yes.
And you are doing what you are to be able to become unapologetically yourself.
One part is to do with character and the other with music, I guess. So I think I've always followed who I am. So I never felt the need to apologize for
Oh, that's beautiful. Right.
I think that's a lot of part of my upbringing as well. But
Do you think music gave you the confidence to not need to apologize to be yourself?
I don't know.
Does music build our self-esteem? A lot of your recent work, we'll talk about how much you've worked on education.
Yes. For me, music is like the filter how I perceive the entire world. So confidence is just one part of that.
Okay.
So, for me, I learned probably everything through music in that sense. And for Ishan even stronger, because he grew up with both of us, with Shubhendra and me. When Shubhendra would put Ishan to sleep, every day he would create a new little lullaby in a new raga. Not with words, but just the sound and the music.
Amazing.
Yeah.
What a blissful upbringing.
Yeah, I think so. It is, it was beautiful, really, yeah.
And coming to what you really like talking about, the perception of silence and what silence means to you and what living in Delhi silence means to you.
Well, there are two parts of it. We created a concept called silence concert, which is both out of a belief in a spiritual power of music, in an uplifting power of music that is often forgotten, but also, and that is related to that, how concerts are normally perceived. We see music too often as a performing arts, which is a distance. The performer is there, the audience is here. Music is a form of communication, and ideally that takes two equal partnerships. Best described by Abhinav Gupta in the 13th century. He wrote a commentary on the Natya Shastra, and he wrote that the perfect audience is like a spotless mirror. So that perception of music where you share the experience, it's not little, okay, very polite, oh nice sari this one is wearing, or the lighting of the lamp, a speech by the chief guest, all the formalities. Wonderful also as an event, as a performance, and that has a role in society as a structure. But if we look at music as more of a spiritual practice, how it can touch you, how, in my belief, Indian music was developed with a close relationship to nature and ragas, the time of the day, the festivals, the light, all vibrations are taken into an account.
Yeah.
And where is the chief guest and the lighting of the lamp in such a scenario? So we wanted to create another experience which we felt this is what we have in our music room, where there are no formalities. People can just be with the music. And the music born from silence and returning to silence. Because, silence and music are two parts of the same coin. One, you need silence for music to happen. That is the first point. Beautifully described by Leopold Stokowski, that the painter uses white and on its canvas for the colors to shine. The canvas of music is silence. Otherwise it can't happen. Or Claude Debussy, a French composer, who said, music is what happens between the silence. I could go on and on about that. You can also see a spiritual power in the contrast between music and silence. Osho described that really beautifully in where he said, you have reached spiritual perfection when there is only silence.
Silence seems to be the punctuation to try and read music correctly, but also the destination that you're trying to reach.
That's beautifully said, yes.
From a very neurological perspective, as I was just mentioning, there have been studies that show that the perception of silence is an active process.
Yeah.
And what you've been describing as formality or discipline and silence, do you think there's a role of all of this in our upbringing, in our education? Do you think our exposure to this at a young age when we are children has an impact on how we grow up and thereby having an influence on how our brain is developing?
Absolutely, absolutely. The use of music is so limited right now, and I think we've just barely scratched the surface of what are the possibilities with children and in education or in daily life, in designing a city. In all the parts, sound and music play an essential role. First of all, it's a form of communication.
Yes.
The lullaby, usually the mother sings, the father too, but That's an important form of communication and bonding. Play songs with groups of children, communities, marking festivals. So the concert format now is basically, if you look at it more from an anthropological point of view, it's more a combination of a social gathering and that spiritual part. Or in a rock concert, sharing same values or ideals, or music can mark every state of our mind and of our being. Chanting, mnemonic aid, like remembering the entire Vedas through chanting, through the 3 notes that were in, whether it were notes or accents is not entirely clear, but that's okay. How the entire Ramayana or Mahabharata is memorized by bards.
All by hearing.
And it's all, these traditions are all over the world. So mnemonic aids, social and cultural glue, learning, spiritual connections, chanting.
All of that has an impact on how we grow up.
Yes.
Sangeet for All.
Yes.
And it's an amazing project, and you've been, I mean, I've seen some of the books that you've written, they're absolutely amazing. But what was your biggest challenge when you started out and you were trying to sort of, you were almost bridging a dialogue between a child and yourself, and you were trying to communicate the medium of music but through music. So what was your biggest ideology when you started this, and how did that start? Tell us about Sangeet for All.
Children are never the problem. It's just by observing them that I created this program, that how they learn.
Okay.
The first question is, do you sit down a child to teach them walking for an hour? Okay, I'm gonna teach you walking right now. It doesn't happen like that. Music also shouldn't happen like that. It's what the child imbibes of what is there. That is how true music education happens. Or dance, for that matter. Dance and music is exact same thing.
Quite honestly, that's true for anything you're learning through life. I mean, even as doctors, I've learned a lot reading books, but what I've learned is what I've learned by seeing patients as things happen.
Who remembers really from school what the teacher was telling them? Or maybe that one story that the teacher was telling through the medium of voice modulation, because he was a good orator. That's another part of music. So one, of course, so music education is happening through a process of playful immersion. That's a term I use a lot. And the other is an authentic acoustic experience. Another term I kind of coined, because what happens often with children is we give them, the worst you can do is like giving them an electronic musical toy, which basically numbs the senses, the auditory senses. That's what it does. Makes these awful sounds. It drives absolutely everyone around
Noise.
crazy in its noise. So what we need to do with children is give them instruments, whether it's from the kitchen, the pans, or you create small instruments with them. But how do we create sound? From their own voice and from whatever other tools we can find. That is the first. And then how you interact with sounds around you. That is the beginning of music education, to build the own voice, to literally find your own voice, quite literally. Tools to create sound, and how you interact, listening. There's this beautiful story of Tansen, who found his guru as a small boy, and how, what was his relation to sound? He could mimic animals really well, and his favorite was scaring people by making the noise of a tiger. So that sound of nature he could relate to. the story goes that Swami Haridas, his teacher, went into the jungle and Tansen scared him and his disciples with the sound of a tiger. Of course, Swami Haridas understood that it was a little boy, but instead of getting angry with him, he said, I want to take you on as a disciple. So many relevances. I always use this story with 4-year-olds because, yeah, that's another thing we put in music, and we put it so much as a performing art that we scare children away in a way. It's divine talent. Yeah, of course it's that, but everyone should have access to that, same as with mathematics or English. Anyway, the importance of listening, that was one of my first entry points.
Mm-hmm.
Then the other was that music is so underused as a subject. And when we look at the time of Plato, of the ancient Greeks, music was one of the main focus points in studies. And he even said, teach children philosophy, mathematics and music, but most of all music, because the patterns in music are the key to all learning. And I think as a neurologist, you probably
There's a lot of, we believe that music, language and maths, they sort of have the same networks.
Yes.
And it's funny, I think neurologists are slightly ostentatious as a group of medical professionals, but we do think that neurologists do try a lot to understand how things work, and you'd be amazed at how many neurologists are musicians.
Yes.
Telling you a story, so one of our pioneers in the field of multiple sclerosis, Dr. Ian MacDonald, and he used to play the piano.
Yeah.
And he realized that he had a stroke because he suddenly couldn't read the music.
Oh, wow.
But he was able to self-diagnose himself because he understood that he wanted to be able to play something, but the visual memory was not matching what the auditory was. So neurologists, musicians, music, language, maths, yes, there's lots of networks. But as a neurologist, what I struggle with is, number one, music is very spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
And we've used this word a couple of times as we've spoken. As a neurologist, I don't know what spirituality is. I can sort of find a scientific explanation to every experience that I had. And I would love to hear your thoughts on what you think is the spiritual element of music perception. And secondly, coming to what you told me about what you said about your experience with children, do you think it translates to the diseased brain? I know you've not worked in music therapy, but what would be your perception when you try and amalgamate all of that?
Let me start with the first point and see where we end, and then maybe you need to remind me of the second part. So the first one was spirituality and music. There are two parts. One is the experience as the musician, as an artist. We go into a space, sometimes, not always, which you can really call a zone. Some people call it in direct relation with the divine, or you lose yourself, or you're super focused, but it's really a different state of being. Music can do that for us, where, yeah, you're just somewhere else. I experienced that as a deep spiritual experience. That's for me, that's personally. I perhaps put that stamp on it.
Mm-hmm.
As a neurologist, one can look at it in a different way. So this is a personal perception and a feeling that I have as an artist.
Would it be fair to say that it is a state of being where you are very optimally functioning or optimally perceiving?
There is no I.
There is no I.
There is no I. I am not there.
Right.
So that is, yeah, that's the best way of describing it maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But to be perfectly honest, I don't think language is the perfect tool.
You don't have the words.
I don't have the words.
None of us.
I have the music.
Right.
that can evoke those feelings.
Okay.
And I think for listeners it can be the same thing. Different emotions. An aesthetic experience. Maybe that is a close thing, right? What is an aesthetic experience where it's not entertainment. Entertainment is at that distance where, it's pleasant. It's pleasant and it can be probably very beneficial. Maybe they use, I think, as anesthetics.
Right.
So I think that kind of pleasant feel of music can do that. But what is an aesthetic experience? That is, to me, a really interesting question because it has two parts. One, I can only ask the question, is there a universal value in that? Can it be taught? My belief is, because I don't have the answers for this, but my belief is that a part of it can and should be taught. And very limited exposure to musical styles is probably not so helpful.
The restriction.
The restriction. Also age appropriate. Very loud rhythmic noises in techno music and all. I think it works for teenagers especially well because there's this angst and this anger that speeds up the heartbeat, and then it's a different social gathering, different function. But that angst, I feel it is all pervasive right now in popular music. Especially for very young children, it's damaging. It is just damaging. How can you...
It's just noise.
Yeah, I don't want to even say that. It's just not age appropriate because you have great artists in those genres as well, who go really deep in that angst and in that extreme sound, and it can be great technical virtuosos as well. It's not a value judgment, but it's a certain function. It's a limited function of music. Maybe.
Okay, fair enough. So trying to translate those thoughts into neurology, if I had, again, I don't know the answer, but we have a voluntary nervous system, you have a conscious part of your nerve, you have an involuntary nervous system, you're breathing, your heart is beating, you're not really controlling it.
Yeah.
And it almost sounds that this sense of spirituality, the state of being, is where the involuntary and the voluntary cease to be so definitively distinct. We are sort of reaching we just are, and we become the involuntary. We are not controlling who we are in that moment.
I think in both cases that's the case.
Yeah.
In both cases that's the case. I mean, in a really loud rock concert, there's also that vibe and that
you become one with it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you cease to have any separation from it.
Yes.
Beautiful. And coming back to what I was talking about earlier, so I know you haven't worked with patients who who have brain diseases or music therapy per se, but you work with the learning brain, you work with the child.
Yes.
And I think in some ways, in neurodegenerative problems or patients who've had a stroke, we are teaching them. They are not learning, they're relearning. Do you think the concepts that you sort of touched upon, where there has to be a fluidity in the experience within a definition, and I think the second thing, that music being so multimodal, it is simultaneously stimulating cognition and movement, has a role in music therapy?
Oh, absolutely. All of this. Look, most music therapists are already musicians who also take this role for whatever reason. My aunt is a music therapist actually, and she used to be a wonderful violinist as well. But Indeed, first of all, it is really a different subject, because like you say, you try to help someone regain a function, or give a child a spot in society. It's a therapy, like in physical therapy, you have an aim to make the patient better, right?
There's an endpoint.
Exactly. So music education, if we look at music education for different kinds of minds, there are a lot of things we can do through music. That is for sure. I mean, what is used a lot is, of course, the physical kind of letting go of frustration, of being confined in a certain way. Music is often used for that. In listening, like you say, regaining speech, if a person has had a stroke. Yes, all of these things are there. In music education, we still put too much emphasis on the performing aspect of it.
Is that everywhere, or is that just in India?
It's everywhere, because every music program needs to work towards a performance. Right? I mean, they're not chanting the mathematical equations on stage. They're singing a song, they're doing a dance, they're playing some instrument, because it's performing arts.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, that's unfortunate. It is an aspect, and it's a wonderful, amazing aspect. But that aspect might not be for everyone. For, I think, everyone, it can be a sharing experience. If you have a group or a team building, and you give everyone a drum, and you have a drum circle, I mean, you literally get in sync with each other.
It's very interesting you say that, because you could apply the analogy to a group of patients who are in a group sharing their experience of disease.
Oh, absolutely.
And feeling that they're not being judged on a performance of a task which is considered quote unquote normal.
Exactly.
But music seems to have certain impacts which are beyond what, let's say, an individual task can do to a patient. So for example, when we have patients with Parkinson's, they develop this complication where they freeze. So the moment they have to walk through a door, they'll suddenly freeze. They can't pick up their leg. And people have come up with techniques where we give them an auditory cue, so like a tal, tuck, 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 and the moment they hear that, they're able to lift that foot.
Yeah.
Did you ever, in your experience with children, feel that music was actually becoming the cue, the trigger for discipline, and yet keeping them free?
Oh, completely. Maria Montessori said, don't talk to children, only sing to them.
Right.
There is a really good reason for that. First of all, you become memorable. We spoke about that when you just talk, no one really listens.
Right.
So perhaps we should sing this.
Sing the interview.
But so that is one part, for sure. The music makes a person memorable, and it sticks with you. Now, for children, one thing is indeed the teacher, but the other thing is the group process.
Yeah.
Look at the temple, look at the churches or synagogues. We have group singing, group chanting, and it's so powerful and uplifting for people. So that we should bring a lot more to our schools and institutes and even workspace. When people play instruments together, sing together, there is a whole different connection, and that I have seen a lot with children. Also, what is usually used is that this children is not so good in academics, so let them do music. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. because usually the one who is really good in academics is also really good in music, and vice versa. So the child who needs a little bit more attention benefits most from the real point of view in music education, that it's not about being a performing art, but a sharing art.
That is beautiful. That is really beautiful. I think I'm going to use that with my patients.
Please, honestly, because I think, yes, performative, it's a bit scary.
It's judgmental.
Exactly, you're put on the spot.
Yeah, and I don't think that's healthy for a child or for a patient.
No.
Going forward, what's the dream?
Oh, that every child has access to high quality music education. And to me, that means in listening, getting to listen to the best classical music traditions of the world, getting that sense of aesthetics, of beauty developed from day one. Doesn't mean that they need to sit still for an hour.
Correct.
It's the worst you can do to a child. Respect the music and sit still. And while they might just sway like this or interact with the music. That's the most beautiful compliment. So listening. Preferably as much as possible at home as well. Active listening, so they describe what they hear. What they hear doesn't need to be in music technical terms. It doesn't. That comes later. What is the tal? What is the raga? What is the harmony? What is the instrument? But first, how does it make me feel? Where am I? Am I in a forest? I use the concept of ragmala paintings usually. The beautiful art form during the Mughals, especially in Rajasthan, it came up and they depicted the different ragas as personalities.
Right.
I do that exercise with children, and they can paint what they hear. It's very, very powerful. Or, interact with the music, either through movement, through words, through drawing, or to just listening.
It's very beautiful. I think if I were to summarize what I've sort of gained from talking to you is that music is very individual and music is very profound, and as much as we are allowing the context for the experience, we have to allow the experience to be individual, whether it's a child or a patient.
Yeah, but again, that's one aspect, because it's also a group experience.
And the sharing, not so much the performance.
Exactly, we can never pick out one aspect.
Yeah.
There are many of them. The traditional ones are true, but the new ones, to develop the voice, find the voice, another term we use, right? Find your own voice.
Find your own voice.
Quite literally, we help children do that as well.
And I'm sure listening to you is going to help a lot of medicos and neurologists find their voice in music. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you, and I wish you all the very best with all your projects, and I will just be following you to figure out what you're doing next.
Thank you so much, and it's a wonderful initiative you're taking with these podcasts. It's an absolute pleasure and honor to be a part of it.
Thank you so much.